Hello, welcome to Post Colonial Space. I'm Masood Raja, and what follows is an excerpted clip from one of my longer webinars. So, what I've decided is that sometimes when people ask really interesting questions, I will pull out that particular part of a webinar and make it available to you as a short clip so that if you don't have time to watch a 1 hour webinar, you can at least watch and listen to the brief exchanges that I usually have with people who attend my webinars. So here is one such clip from a recent webinar. I hope you enjoy it. This week we'll be talking about part 2 of the novel, right? And then next week we'll conclude part 3 and have a general discussion about the novel. So that's the plan. Probably next week also we'll talk about your final exam, which is pretty much going to be on the same model as the midterm. The only difference is that the deadline will have to be firm because I'll have to grade and then turn in your grades after that. Now, you already know that your journal deadline is fast approaching. I think I'd extended it up to April 17th. So make sure that you upload all your 5 journals so that you don't lose any points. I'm not going to extend it any further. Okay, so make sure you do that. And then all we'll have to work on is your final, which will be the same pattern. Maybe the number of questions will be more, but you'll get at least a week to work on it, and then you just upload it, and then you're done. And that we'll decide next week. All right, so as people are coming in, where we had left our conversation was at the end of part 1, right? We learn a lot of things in part 1. First of all, we get to know Oquanako as a person, as a character. We kind of know why he is the way he is, right? What is he trying to prove? We also know about the local culture of the village, right? Where we understand that they have a strong belief in the various deities, various gods, plus the ancestral spirits that they have to appease all the time. We learn about the death rituals, about the marriage rituals, about how justice is served performatively, right? All of these things, as we read Oquanako's story, Achebe is doing a great job of introducing to us the tribal customs, even some that we absolutely may disagree with, right? Like not keeping the twin children or the power of the religious figures, right? The brutality towards women, all of these are the good and bad parts of that culture, right? And by the end of the novel, we learn that during a funeral ceremony, Oquanako's gun or musket accidentally discharges. It kills one of his tribe's young men from the tribe. And as a result, he's exiled from the village. And he takes his 3 wives and all his children and goes to the village where his mother had come from. And in that sense, what we learn is that your mother's village and clan is always your refuge, even though you as a man will never be known for being from your mother's village. But we learn as we read chapter 14 and beyond that it has a significance, that if you are a good son, when your mother dies, you don't bury her at the same place where she was married, but you take her remains to the village that she came from so that she can be buried with her ancestors. So Oquanako has lost everything. His friend Obraika keeps his yams and keeps some of his wealth, right, to take care of it. And he has lost everything. The reputation that he had built, the material wealth that he had built is all gone. And he has to make a new start in this new village, where he doesn't have much of a voice, but he is accepted as son of one of the daughters of the clan. And so that's the section we are in, okay? he has to spend 7 years in exile there. And it's kind of truncated. We don't get the detail of everyday life, but we realize he makes his place. He's given some land and some seeds, and he plants his crops. But he's not the same Okonoko, right? He is out of his element, right? He has left the place where he was known for his masculinity, where he was a leader, and here he's not necessarily a leader. And the tribal customs are different. They don't agree with him all the time. But in his second year, when Obraika visits, he brings him a lot of wealth, right? Cowries. And he says, this is what, we raised by selling some of your seeds and some of the crop that I had planted for you. But he also tells them that there are ominous signs emerging, that one tribe, which was neighboring tribe of Okonoko's tribe, had been completely wiped out. And they've been wiped out because a white missionary had come in there trying to preach to the people, and the people killed him. And as a result, the white men came with their soldiers, and they basically killed everyone in the town square. And some of them who survived, they had come to Okonoko's village for refuge, and that had never really happened before. There was no history amongst the tribes of one tribe wiping out another tribe. So until then, the stories of the white man or the Europeans were just myths in this part of Nigeria, right? But now they are becoming a reality. And what we are also learning is that these missionaries, they come into these villages, they have a few local converts, right? And then they try to convert the local people to their church. Now, this is where your knowledge of what we read before, like the Song of Lavino, the Song of Ukol, and Chinwezu, and also Ngugi wa Thiong'o will come handy, because they talk about this, the Christianization of natives. It's not simply that people are encouraged to convert. In the process, they are also encouraged to despise their old ways, because those are heathen ways, right? And that is what is emerging in this part, right? A missionary comes in, starts preaching in Okonoko's father's village. Eventually, there is not a clash, but the village elders decide, okay, give them the evil forest. They can build their church there. So they don't even understand the power of this new force, right? How does it work? The way traditionally Christianity worked in its early stages in Rome and elsewhere was that it was very much appealing to anyone who was downtrodden, who was an outcast, who didn't have a privileged place in the given social order. So these are the people that they are attracting, right? And then they openly defy the power of the gods. They go and rescue the twins that are thrown into the forest. So they are setting this precedence that here is a new religion. Our God is more powerful. And if you come and join us, you'll be one of us. They even take in the outcasts from within the tribes. So it's literally the church building itself up by all those who previously had no say in the tribal culture or were ostracized by it, right? But there's one difference. Behind this church is the power of the administrative system of the British Empire. Just like the people in other village were wiped out. So this is a strategy then. I mean, the missionaries obviously are probably sincere, but this is how at least the British colonialism worked, right? The missionaries would go in, they will start converting people, then they'll become more aggressive in their approach, they'll develop clashes with the natives, and that's when the British Army was sent in, right? And so in so many ways, the missionaries will give a cause to the military to intervene. Just like here, if you look at the history of the settlement of the West, right? Now, the West was West because the Native American tribes were relocated to the West as part of a treaty, right? Where they had left their territories in the East and relocated here. So according to the treaty, these were their lands, right? But the settlers would keep pushing in, right? So they will bring in families, even though that action was illegal, right? When the Native Americans would invade them or attack them, then that would give the cavalry a reason to keep invading into Indian territory, right? So that's the connection between the missionaries and the power behind it. Now, one major thing that happens in this section is that Okonoko's son, right, starts going to the local church. And when Okonoko confronts him, right, he finds out that he's been going to the church. He actually beats him up, and that's when he leaves. You know, he basically leaves never to return, right? And that also sets another, masculinity crisis for Okonoko, because he feels betrayed by the gods and by his own chi as to how could he have a son like that. So it's a lot of things that have taught Okonoko that what he values the most is waning. He's not powerful anymore, and obviously he's not young anymore. And there is this new power emerging. It's religious, but it is connected to political power. And the tribes are realizing that the Europeans or the white man is not just a myth, they are real. And they are now preaching within their communities. So the tribal culture is realizing this new encroachment of new ideas, new religion, right? And that's what we learn in this section of the novel. And then by the end of part 2 is when Okonoko, his 7 years time is over, right? And he is getting ready to leave. And he throws a huge feast for the people of her mother's tribe. But we already know there is a little bit of foreshadowing. We know that he is not likely to go back and just resume the life that he had. As a lot can change in 7 years, right? He's not young anymore. And then while he was gone, his own tribe, his own village continued on. There'll be new power brokers. And all around that is this new power that is emerging, and that is the power of the Europeans, their church and their military, their trade interests. So we know at the end of section 2 that Okonoko himself is changed in so many ways, changed in a way that his ideas are pretty much the same, but he's aware that the world around him is changing. And as he returns to his village, he's returning to an altered culture. And so section 3 will then be about how Okonoko handles that change, right? That's what makes the novel in so many ways tragic, right? Does chi play in shaking Okonoko's destiny? That's a really important question. Now, if we looked at it from Okonoko's own point of view, by the end of this section, he is kind of thinking that his chi is either not strong enough or has turned against him, right? Because he realizes that only if his chi is not protecting him anymore would he lose his son to this new formed religion, right? So he has these doubts about his own chi, right? And remember, in the Aibo tradition and other traditions too, you have to appease your chi constantly. It's your personal god, right? And sometimes it can turn against you. So in this sense, even he himself feels that his chi is letting him down or is bent upon actually undoing him. So that feeling does come across in this part of the novel. Oppressed or do not benefit from system of power seek new systems, like Christianity in the tribes, to benefit from that new system of power, or at least not be oppressed by the original system. Yes, and this thing, this trope works not just in religious terms. I mean, remember, why did Marx focus on the proletariat, right? The working people, because Marx's view of the world was agonistic. There was a capitalistic class and there was a working class, right? The working class came together and constituted a class because they had to sell their labor to make a living, right? And so hence the idea was that if people shared the same kind of oppressive situations, they can come together against the powerful classes. In religious terms, then, if you look at the two major monotheistic religions, Christianity and Islam, if you look at their beginning, right, they are always more appealing to the oppressed groups within a given culture, the people who may not be included in the promise of that tribe and all. Those are the ones who already know that their place in the current hierarchy, right? And then when they see something new emerging, which promises them access, equality, wealth, material or spiritual, then they are the ones more attracted to that new system. The people most reluctant to join a new system would obviously be people like Okonoko, right? Because their prestige is already dependent on the intact social system in which they are on the top. So that kind of makes sense, right? And then you will see that as we enter modernity, things get more complicated, right? I mean, if you look at America, one would say that, you know, on one hand, if I went and said all workers should be paid $15 an hour, all the workers will unite, right? But it doesn't really happen, right? Part of it is because so much of our experience is race-based, it's racialized, it's politicized, individualized. But by and large, in this situation, the same thing is at play, that the downtrodden or oppressed of one established system are more likely to join a newly emerging system, religious or social, because they can see more chances of a better life and upward mobility in it. And you see that in this section, right? Who joins it, right? The first woman to join them was a woman who had lost so many children because she always had twins, right? And according to the tribal customs, the twins were abandoned in the evil forest. So now she's pregnant and she thinks the same thing is going to happen. So she says, well, I'm going to go join there because they don't kill twins, right? So her reason is very personal, but she knows that she'll have a different life. Similarly, the outcasts who live inside of town, they've been declared outcasts. They cannot do certain things. They cannot shave their facial hair. They have to live separately, are the ones who show up at the church and say, you know, we would like to be Christians too, because they see the possibility of changing their life, right? So in that sense, religion does have that appeal, that transformative appeal for people who are either oppressed, sidelined, or ostracized by custom, by tradition. So one thing, as I pointed out, you know, which is really interesting about this novel is that Achebe isn't just giving us a romanticized history of these tribes, of Ibo culture. He clearly is pointing out that the customs had certain things that certain people within the tribes had a problem with, right? And that it's those cleavages, right, within the hierarchy of the given village culture that enable the Christian missionaries to, you know, make a dent, right? And then create a spot, create their own church, create their own converts, right? And as a result, then they become a constituency. Anything else about this part? I mean, plot-wise, we are pretty clear. Part two is about Okonoko's exile, 7 years, with his mother's people. His status is diminished. He's still respected. And he, reestablishes his compound there and grows his crops, but he's not as prosperous as he used to be. But we know that his friend Obraika has taken care of at least the wealth that he left there and has come and visited him twice. And meanwhile, the new emergent power in the region is the Christian missionaries. And we are also hearing rumors about the power of the white people in trade and everything else on the fringes of the tribes. It's looming there. It hasn't directly intervened in Okonoko's life yet. But technically, historically, if you want to look at it, is these are very isolated tribes. By this time, the British have already established their seaports, they've established their system of justice, their system of law, their postal system, right? Now, these tribes might be not very well aware of it, but they are living on the fringes of an imperial system, right? So in the next section, you will see how that imperial system and Okonoko's life come into a clash, right? That's why the novel is called Things Fall Apart. Right? Immediately, Okonoko blamed his chief for things going bad in his life, almost like a scapegoat, because he was refusing to accept that maybe his way of approaching a situation was flawed. This may stem from him only viewing the qualities of his father as truly bad and only wants to be the opposite. That's a very good point. Think of it this way. And if you read the end of that paragraph, remember he's looking at the log, right, which is burning. And he realizes that that's burning fire, but all it produces is ash, right? But before that, he goes through a series of justifications as to why his son is not the kind of son that he wants. Now, deep down, Achebe tells us he knows that his son is more like his father, right? Okonoko's father. But first he thinks that his wife was not loyal to him, so maybe she conceived him with someone else. But then he can't deny that his son has some kind of resemblance to his grandfather, Okonoko's father. Then he considers that it is his chi that has abandoned him. And then as he's thinking about this a little more, he looks at the log and he sees that the most potent fire on the wood doesn't produce fire after it's burned out, it produces ash. So then for him, his son becomes that ash. But yeah, there is no acknowledgement that his own treatment of his son, right, could have caused that, or that his own idea of what constitutes masculinity might be flawed, right? I mean, he also thinks that his son is a woman, so that sexist language of assigning weakness to women is also part of that patriarchal, sexist way of looking at it. So in so many ways, Okonoko is already behind the times because his view of masculinity is already is slightly archaic, even within the tribe. Okay. How were colonizers able to make certain native populations believe that they were inferior? I would blame the technology and literature they brought. That's a very important question. Now, it depends. It's differently in different colonial scenarios. Like if you look at the Aztecs, right? Now, when Francisco Pizarro and others land, right? In Aztec prophecies, there was a prophecy that said that God will come down, gods will come down, and they will look golden. And when they come down, the world will come to an end. So the Aztec king was bound by that prophecy. So whatever atrocious things they did, it's recorded in their history that his advisors thought, these people don't act like gods. But the power of the prophecy was so strong that even the king gives into it. Now, if you go to other colonial situations, one way the colonizers were able to control the population was that they will create a constituency that they can incorporate in their system, right? So let's say in India, the British created the mythology of the martial races, right? And so how would they bring people to their side, right? The British would go to a local Raja and they would say, you know, you're a Rajput. We respect you. You are warrior people. We are warrior people. Now, if you build an alliance with us, you get to keep your status. All we need is to control this country. They will give them more power and then have the treaties with them. Or in a complex country, they will play one tribe against the other. So in India, they could very easily take Muslims, one Muslim ruler here, one there, right? And pit them against the Hindus or the Sikh rulers. So because every given complex culture has its enmities, right? So on a larger scale, they will play with already existing enmities in the region. They will build alliances with one group, tell them, we'll give you the guns, you wipe them out, right? And then in the process, one other enemy is already wiped out, this one is weakened, and they end up being strong. I mean, look at the British Army, wherever they were. In India, the British Army, the Royal Indian Army, never had a majority of British troops in it. These were Indian troops, right? Now, how do you incorporate the Indian troops in the project of empire? Okay, so you've just conquered them. You give them a local pride instead of a larger pride. So if you look at the organization of Royal Indian Army, it was organized on ethnic lines. So if you picked up an infantry battalion, right, it will have a complete white command structure, but the companies would be Sikh company, Muslim company, Kharwal company, Gorkha company, right? So each company would then become this ethnic unit. They will compete with each other, but they will also try to prove who is better. How do you try to prove who is better? By professionally being more professional soldiers. So the competition was lateral, and you've already given them a mythology that you're superior to the civilians, right? So all of this came together, was a highly devised system of control. Similarly, in the civil sphere, the same processes were followed, right? So then was the role of the educational system. So you politically control a territory, you have built alliances, you have obliterated the opposition, then you create an educational system in which it is imperative for natives to learn English and to develop proficiency in it. Then you develop a system of civil services where they have to take an exam in English, right? They have to know the British law, right? So by the time you've been there for 50 or 100 years, anyone who is coming through that educational system, all they are learning is how to succeed within the given system, right? And so then it becomes a self-perpetuating system, self-sustaining system, unless some peoples go out of the way and they start thinking critically about the system itself, which happens in all the independence movements, right? But overall, you play with the grievances that might already exist in a culture. You use force, or you use some kind of an appeal towards upward mobility, towards giving them more of a voice, and then create a native constituency that is loyal to you, whose interest is connected to the empire, right? And it's not just that it ends. Even now, I mean, you can find people in Africa, people in India, people elsewhere in the post colonies who do international business, whose interests are connected to Canada, Australia, United States. So in that sense, their loyalties are with the world economic order and not necessarily with their own people, right? Because if they have to, let's say if you are in Ahmedabad and you have to build, you get a contract from someone here, we want to build, a plant. We want to build a manufacturing plant. And if you're a capitalist, your interest isn't whether the Ahmedabad workers will get paid a fair wage. You are in it for profit, right? And you're competing other people who can bid on the same contract. So you'll go to the American factory and say, I can build you a plant here with the cheapest possible labor. Then half of your effort would also be politically in keeping the labor cheap, right? And that's how you become part of a dominant system, because your self-interest and your group interest gets connected to that. I think something that this book has helped with is showing how relatively the terms civilization and how relative are. Additionally, I suppose it is easier to be blind to negative aspects of the social structure you know and understand, because it is what you have mainly been exposed to. So your experience social structure is normal, but that is a relative term. Good point. Yeah, think of it. If you have experienced being in a religious family or know someone who is in a religious family structure, what is it that their parents caution each other and caution the children? Don't watch this. Don't go and hang out with those people. Don't read these kind of books, right? Why? Because they realize that the structure that they've indoctrinated their children with, the belief system, whatever, can only sustain itself if the children keep thinking that this is the only truth and this is natural, right? So they are afraid of any knowledges that might produce a chink in that, right? Or might make them think differently about that, right? So that then teaches us that any normalized system of belief, right, has to have certain exclusions, right? It must create its others to constantly maintain itself, right? And that it must hide its own flaws and rationalize them, right, to its own adherents. And the crisis occurs when the practitioners of any religion or social system start questioning that very system. And the only way they can do that is if they learn about another system that might exist, because then their own existence becomes comparative, right? So, yeah, in that sense, that kind of relativism plays a huge role in developing a mode of thinking that is critical of the system within which you exist. And most of the times, we assume or internalize that what we believe in is absolutely the truth and natural, right? Even though it is produced by a body of knowledge that someone has taught us, the customs that my parents followed and their parents followed, right? It can retain itself for as long as there is no outside threat, or for as long as people don't look outwards for something else, right? And the moment some knowledge from outside enters it, the logic of the system itself comes to crisis, right? And I think Achebe does a great job of teaching us what's happening in the Igbo culture, right? And how does Okonoko develop as a person in that? And then what are the complexities of that culture? What are its flaws, right? Because that entire intact culture is now reaching a point of crisis. That is what the novel is about, right? And we will read that in part 3. Thank you so much for watching or listening to this brief clip. If you are interested in the longer version, the link will be in the description and you can watch the whole webinar. Thank you so much for your support. And as always, if you have any questions, any concerns, you can always post them in the comments and I'll be happy to respond to them. If you have a moment and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so now so that you get timely notifications of whatever is happening on this channel. Thank you for your support. Stay safe, and as always, from me to you, peace and love.